So welcome everyone. So this talk, as Gavin has mentioned, is called it's a Herstory. So quite often we talk about his story, but we often forget her story. So this will focus on tell 20 women's stories from 20 local headstones, and then these images here are 3 of the women who will feature in tonight's talk. So over the summer there, did a walking tour with a local actor called Mary Lindsay, and we call it 12 women's graves in Dundonald Cemetery. So they were quite well received. And in fact, 2 of those figures, the images there they're 2 of the locations we called that on that tour. But each of my books have featured women's sections in them, so I'm keen to tell women's stories because they're often overlooked and forgotten. So this talk is a version of a talk that I did last week to Knock Ladies Provost group. So because it was done for a group in East Belfast, there might be a little bit of an East Belfast bias, but I don't apologize for that because, as we all know, the world revolves around East Belfast. So this is also a number of these stories that I'm going to tell tonight. I will then be recording the stories for another book that I'm working on, which has the working title of 50 Fascinating Females. So, so to say, some of these ladies will feature in that book due out certainly before the end of the millennium. So because my last book was called 2020, I'm going to call it 20 Graves tonight. So I'll get cracking. This is the first one. This is the furthest one away. This is up to Londonderry City Cemetery. So the majority of the graves will be in the Greater Belfast area. But as I say, this one is up in Derry City Cemetery. So it's Cecil Frances Alexander. So this is an image here of Cecil Frances Alexander, and then a little sketch of the same from my most recent book, 2020. That little sketch was done by my friend David Francis. So on Cecil Frances Alexander, it says CFA, in brackets, hymn writer, wife of William, Bishop of Derry and Raphoe, died October 12, 1895. A plaque in the grave also states that Cecil Frances Alexander wrote many poems and hymns. She is best remembered for There is a Green Hill Far Away and All Things Bright and Beautiful. So that's what it says on the plaque there at the base of the grave. Also, she wrote Once in Royal David City as well. The headstone also commemorates William Alexander, Bishop of Derry and Raphoe, 1867 to 1886, Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of All Ireland, 1886 to 1911. And then a headstone nearby, this one, it also commemorates Cecil Frances Alexander, killed in the sinking of SS Leinster by German submarine 10th October 1918. RMS Leinster was torpedoed and sunk by U-123 whilst bound for Holyhead. Many of the passengers were servicemen returning from periods of home leave. Up in the area where I was on Friday night, for example, there is a blue plaque to Cecil Frances Alexander. This is in appropriately Bishop Street, and you'll see it commemorates Mrs. Cecil Frances Alexander, 1818 to 1895, and that's in her house in Bishop Street. And then this lovely stained glass window is in St. Column's Cathedral there on the city side. So that's the first one. Second one then is in Belfast City Cemetery, and I refer to this circle here as Lewis Central because there are 5 graves here which relate to C.S. Lewis. So we'll be calling at this at Lewis Central on Saturday. I'm doing a tour of the city, sorry, Sunday, and I'm doing a tour of the city cemetery as part of the C.S. Lewis Festival. So tickets still available. So this is the headstone directly in front, with the black cross to the right. That is where C.S. Lewis's parents were born. But I'm going to talk about this woman, his mother, Flora Lewis. She was born in Cork, and she was the daughter of the rectory at Methodist College in Belfast. She was described as the cleverest people we ever had, admittedly amidst not very stiff competition. I have to say that as I went to Inst. And she went on to gain a first-class maths degree from Queen's College, in other words, before it became the university. In his book, Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis, known as Jack, talks about his mother's premature death, aged only 46 in 1908. And he says, we lost her gradually as she was gradually withdrawn from our life into the hands of nurses and delirium and morphia, and as our whole existence changed into something alien and menacing, as the house became full of strange smells and midnight noises and sinister whispered conversations. So C.S. Lewis, for the first 10 years of his life, in other words, from 1898 until 1908, he had an idyllic upbringing in East Belfast. But then 1908 was his annus horribilis, to quote the Queen, when both his mother and uncle and his paternal grandfather all died in 1908. So it could be argued if Jack Lewis had enjoyed a much longer period with his mother, he may not have had to entertain and occupy himself to such a great extent, and thus his literary output and creativity may have been notably different. So it's interesting, as I mentioned there, that C.S. Lewis's mother, Flora, got a first class in mathematics, first class degree in mathematics, whereas his son was very good with the words. That's an understatement. So this is a family picture here. So in the front there, that's Albert, C.S. Lewis's dad, and on his right knee, that is C.S. Lewis's elder brother, Warren, known as Warnie, and then on Albert's left knee then is Clive Staples Lewis, known as Jack, and then behind with their rather fancy hat then, that is Flora Lewis there. So that's the second one. I say that's in the city cemetery. This is over to the Donald Cemetery now, and I'm talking about the unmarked grave here, just to the right of the black grave, to the left of the photograph. And that is where this lady is buried. She was called Jane Scott. She lived at 120 Templemore Street in Belfast when she died, and she died on the 19th December 1911, aged 49. The East Side Lives project, which is where this mural is from, and with a little information panel, claims that Jane was the lady who cursed the Titanic. But then, as part of the research, then it became they unearthed, if excused the pun, they discovered more information about Jane, which hadn't been known previously. So the story goes something like, she was the mother of Samuel Joseph and George Scott. So a Scott male was the first person killed in the building of SS 401, later to be the Titanic, on 20th April 1910. So the Scott male lay in an unmarked grave in the city cemetery for more than 101 years until the Fela local festival erected this headstone on the plot in 2011, to say 101 years after the fatality. So as per the headstone, it claims that 15-year-old Samuel died at age only 15 whilst working on the building the Titanic. So it's claimed that he fell from staging and fractured his skull, and then he was, to say, the first fatality on Titanic. It was discovered as part of this East Side Lives project that in fact it wasn't Samuel who died. It was his younger brother George, who was only 13 at the time. So he shouldn't have been in the shipyard at that age. So hence the small amount of compensation that led to Jane cursing the Titanic. Jane was put in a very, very awkward situation. And so she said that it was Samuel rather than George who was killed. So then Samuel, he had to get offside. So he then emigrated to Canada. And when he was in Canada, he converted to Catholicism, and he returned to Belfast in the 1950s, where he ran a sweet shop. And there's a photograph of Samuel then to the left of the screen, and he died in 1968. And he's buried, because he had converted to Catholicism when he was in Canada, he's buried now in an unmarked grave in Milltown. So you have the mother, Jane, buried in this unmarked grave after her death in 1911. She's buried in Dundonald. Then you have George, who's buried here after his death in 1910, previously in an unmarked grave. Now the headstone has got the his brother's details on it. And then you have Samuel, who continues to rest in an unmarked grave at Milltown. So those are just the backstory, and it's very much a new story to Jane Scott. The next one then is down to Donaghadee. We're going to call into the cabinet and get an ice cream. And this headstone, it says, erected by Grace Neal in loving remembrance of her husband, John Neal, who died 12th June 1860, aged 40 years. Also her son, William John, who was drowned, at the North Shore, Whitehaven, 19th March 1874, was interred in Moresby Church, aged 30. Also her son, Hugh, who died at sea, 10th November 1876, aged 24 years. Also the above named Grace Neal, who died 7th July 1915, aged 98 years. So this is another sketch of David's of Grace Neal, and then this is Grace Neal's bar. Grace Neal's pub claims to be the oldest in Ireland. Grace herself is therefore possibly one of the best known names around the area. She was born in 1817 during the reign of George III, and owned and ran the small pub herself, which is probably highly unusual in those days, possibly unique in Ireland. Donaghadee being such an important, busy port, it is also likely that the business was rather lucrative, and Grace's husband John was one of the last captains of the Donaghadee Port Patrick mail packet steamers. So I didn't realise until quite recently that there was an actual Grace Neal, and say she's buried in Donaghadee Parish Graveyard. Next one then is back to the city cemetery, and this, if you can see to the right of the screen, that is the Gallagher Steps. That just gives you some idea of where this headstone is, and this is to Gertrude Annie Taylor. And this is Gertrude Annie Taylor here. She had served in the UVF Hospital in Belfast and in the 20th General Hospital in Camier in France, and was working in the first London General Hospital in Camberwell when she died of pneumonia, as you'll see there in that photograph, on 12th December 1916, aged 35. Her headstone there, that's a fine Celtic cross, and then her details are on the side of that, the tall cross. But then the family decided that this wasn't an impressive enough memorial to their eldest daughter, so then they put this headstone to the right on the family plot, and then replicated the information that it's on the side of the main headstone on the front of this second headstone. And that broken column hasn't been vandalized, thankfully, but a broken column symbolizes a life cut short or the end of a family line. So in this case, Gertrude Annie Taylor, a life cut short. The Taylors were extremely wealthy. They lived in this house, which was called Strathern, and then that house was gobbled up into the Strathern School, and in fact it was only recently demolished, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. That used to be where the offices were in Strathern School. And Alexander Taylor, he was the manager of the Owen O'Cork mill on the Bearsbridge Road. So that's Gertrude Annie Taylor. She's there on the Strand Town and District War Memorial, and in a War Memorial in Belmont Presbyterian Church. There's another 2 members of the Voluntary Aid Detachment. Sorry, Gertrude Annie Taylor was a nurse with the Voluntary Aid Detachment, and there's another 2 members of the Voluntary Aid Detachment buried in City Cemetery. Another one being Ida Martin, and she, like Gertrude Annie Taylor, is also on the Strand Town War Memorial. The next one then is an unmarked grave, again in Donald Cemetery, and it's more or less the centre of the shot here, and it's where this lady rests. She's called Mary Jane Sloan Gleeson. She was born on 6th August 1866, and she was a stewardess with the White Star Line and was on board Titanic during her maiden and only voyage. After the liner's collision with the iceberg, Mary spoke to Thomas Andrews, who advised her it is very serious, but keep the bad news quiet for fear of panic. Shortly afterwards, Mary was standing by one of the lifeboats, which was being filled. When Andrews recognised her, Thomas Andrews, obviously not obviously, but the designer of Titanic, and Andrews asked her why she was not boarding a lifeboat. Mary apparently replied, "All my friends are staying behind. It would mean not to go." Andrews apparently said, "It would mean for you not to go. You must get in." Sloan finally agreed and was aboard the lifeboat when it left the ship, with some sources claiming that Mary was amongst the last people to leave the sinking Titanic. After the disaster, Mary returned to England on board the SS Lapland, and in the 1979 film SOS Titanic, Mary was portrayed by Helen Mirren, and that's a photograph then of Helen Mirren playing Mary Sloan, there to the right. Mary lived in America for many years after the disaster. Then she returned to Belfast when she died. She was living at 104 Sandown Road at Knock in Belfast when she died on 20th February 1953, aged 81. And as you can see, she's on a completely unmarked grave. I think it's very sad that we're quite rightly making such a song and dance, for want of better words, about Titanic, that this lady who actually survived Titanic is actually buried in a completely unmarked grave. And this is another grave that we call out. I call out with Mary, and we're doing Mary Lindsay when we're doing the women's tours in the Donald Cemetery. So this is down to Hollywood, the Priory Cemetery, and this is the Prager headstone. So you'll see these fine images here either side of the main headstone. But if you look carefully at the one to the left, it appears that that lady is wearing a mask, a precursor to COVID regulations. So this is this lady here, Mary, Rosamund Prager. And so again, that's a sketch that from my most recent book of Rosamund Prager. And then there's a photograph then of her in her studio. She was born in Hollywood, and her father had emigrated to Belfast from Holland. to work with his uncle in the family linen company. She was educated at Sullivan in the Belfast Upper School, and then Belfast School of Art and the Slade School of Art in London. Following her time in Paris, afterwards she went to Paris. Following her time in Paris, she returned to Hollywood. In 1914, built St. Bridget's studio on Hibernia Street, where she worked from until her death. She's best known for her sculptures, working primarily in plaster, but also in marble, terracotta, and stone. Her sculptures include Johnny the Jig in Hollywood, Fanula, the daughter of Lear at Causeway School near Bush Mills, and the Lord Edward Carson Memorial in Belfast Cathedral. She was president of the Ulster Academy, later the Royal Ulster Academy, and an honorary academian. You can tell I should have listened carefully, more carefully at school, of the Royal Hibernian Academy. In 1927, received an honorary MA from Queen's University. In 1939, she was awarded the MBE. She died at Rock Cottage in Hollywood on 16th April 1954, aged 86. The blue plaque in Hollywood's Hibernia Street, stating Rosamund Prager, sculpture, 1867 to 1954, had her studio here. So it's Rosamund Prager. The next one is over to Cornmoney, and this is the Geddes plot. So buried in this plot is Wilhelmina Geddes. She was an Irish stained glass artist who was an important figure within the Irish arts and crafts movement, and also the 20th century British stained glass revival. Her notable works include the windows at Sir Bartholomew's in Ottawa in Canada, St. Peter's Church in Lampeter, Wales, and the King Albert Memorial window in the Cathedral of St. Martin in Ypres in Belgium. She was born in County Leitrim, and her parents then moved back to their native city of Belfast, where her father set up a business as a building contractor. She also studied at Methody, along with her three younger sisters. She later moved to the Belfast School of Art. She was encouraged by Rosamund Prager, in other words, the lady who called out previously there, to continue her studies. Geddes joined Sarah Purser at the acclaimed stained glass workshop called Tower of Glass in 1910. She was dogged by illness. She returned to Belfast before 1916 and lived there, in Dublin, until moving in 1925 to work in London at the Glass House in Fulham. She died on 10th August 1955 in London of a pulmonary embolism, buried in Cornmoney along with her mother and sister. Even after moving to London, Geddes claimed that her native identity never wavered. As she says, she was always, quote, a Belfast woman. So a blue plaque was placed by the Ulster Historic Society at her residence at Marlborough Park, south between the Malone and the Lisburn roads. I think that's a cracker photograph of Wilhelmina Geddes in action. So we're over then to the Donald Cemetery. This quite prominent grave, the Dixons, and that's Lady Dixon there to your left. Then again to the right, then Lady Dixon with Lady Edith Stuart Dixon along with Sir Thomas Dixon. The couple lived at Wilmond House, and Edith died on 20th January 1964, aged 90, whilst living at 38 Malone Park. There's not many people can downsize to Malone Park, but you can see she was downsizing from Wilmond House, so quite easy to downsize from that house. And then Wilmond House and surrounding lands were donated to Belfast City Council in 1959 and are now popularly referred to as the Sir Thomas and Lady Dixon Park, best known as the location of the usually annual Rose Trials in July. So those are a couple of lovely images, I think, of featuring Lady Edith Stuart Dixon. So the next one is up in Roselawn, and this is a Troubles victim. This is Norma Spence. So you'll see from the headstone, it says Woman Search Officer 736. Lovely memory of my dear daughter Norma Spence, served Belfast and Londonderry, 27th January 1975 to 3rd March 1978. Murdered whilst on duty by the Provisional IRA, 3rd March 1978. And if you look, you'll see that's the Civilian Search Unit logo there at the top of the grave. And then if you look to the left, you'll see then that was a little urn there placed, or a flower holder, sorry, from her friends in the CSU, Civilian Search Unit. So this is Norma Spence here to your right, along with to the left Trooper James Nawasad. They were both shot dead whilst at an army pedestrian checkpoint at Donegal Street in Belfast, during what was called what became known as the Rag Day murders. So essentially there, the gunmen had disguised themselves as Arabs, and then were throwing flour, etc., trying to blend in with the crowd, and then opened fire then when they got close to the checkpoint, killing, as I say, Norma Spence and James Nawasad. James was from Scotland, and Norma lived at 3 Iron Park in Ballybean. So this is a photograph then of some of Norma's colleagues at the time of her death. I think they were referred to, although I could be wrong, as black finches as opposed to green finches. That's Norma Spence at Roselawn. Still at Roselawn then is Headstone, and this commemorates Grace Bannister, OBE. And Headstone was erected in loving memory of Grace, OBE, a loving wife, mother, and grandmother. Died 5th December 1986. And it says then Lord Mayor of Belfast 1981 to 1982. She was educated at Roslyn Street Primary School and Park Parade, where all the best people went to school, like my granda. She left school at 14 in order to work in the family bakery during the Second World War. Sorry, in the family bakery. During the Second World War, Grace, I should have wrote my specs. Grace went to work at Mackey's making parts for Sterling bombers. In 1948, she married John Bannister and was elected to the Belfast Corporation in 1965, representing the Ulster Unionist Party. She served as Deputy Lord Mayor in 1975, and in 1979 was appointed High Sheriff of Belfast. And in 1981, she was elected as the first female Lord Mayor of Belfast. She was awarded an OBE in the 1984 New Year's Honours for services to local government in Northern Ireland. And she was living at this house. Oh, sorry, that's her. She was living at this house here, 34 Grand Parade in Belfast, when she died on 5th December 1986, age 62. So you'll see that photograph, courtesy of the or from the Belfast 35mm.co.uk site, is from during her time as Mayor of Belfast. So folks might be able to remember when those big lampposts were put outside the house of the serving Lord Mayor. So they don't do it anymore, but those lampposts are now outside the Ulster Hall in Bedford Street. So this is Grace Bannister here during her term in office. And then Grace is also remembered in this bridge, which is on the Collinswater Community Greenway, the Grace Bannister Bridge. It was not too far away from her house at Grand Parade. So that's actually Dixon Park, part of Orangefield. So it's basically at Bloomfield, Belfast. So the next one is also in Bloomfield. This is at Roselawn. This is my gran and granda. So this is their on their wedding day. So I have to speak about my granny. So this is my gran and granda here, and then these two fine-looking individuals either side of the photograph. They're just back from a stint as the Ugly Brothers at the pantomime. So that's me to the right and my brother Andrew to the left, along with my granny and granda, my cousins who were living in South Africa at the time, and most importantly, of course, or equally importantly, the dog Mac. My granny and granda lived at the same house, 5 Kensington Avenue, not far from that bridge that I showed you, for 57 years. So that photograph of them on their wedding day, that features on the front cover of my forthcoming Roselawn Cemetery book, and then their headstone features on the back cover. So I can't really talk about them too much, so I'll go on to the next one. This is the Donald Cemetery, and this is Mary Glasgow, and you'll see that it says on the headstone, in loving memory of my aunt Mary Glasgow MBE, died 26th January 2004, aged 101, highly respected as a Christian worker and teacher, and also as a friend to many during her internment in a POW camp in the Far East during the Second World War. This is Mary Glasgow here, with thanks to Anna Copeland for supplying this photograph. And Mary Glasgow in latter life lived at 18 Dunleedy Park in Dundonald, and then she was admitted to Dunleedy Nursing Home, again Dundonald, on the 9th of February 1982, and she died there in 26th January 2004. So when I were a lad, I also lived in Dunleedy Park, but so possibly around the time when Mary was living there. Because of her experiences as a POW in the Far East during the Second World War, she was used as she was employed as a consultant for this program that many of you will remember at TENCO. So again, Mary Glasgow features on the tour I do with Mary Lindsay. So she was quite a brave age when she died. This lady here was also a fair old age, 109, and this is up in Roselawn. So you can see there, remember, it's Lillian Mary Spence, died 28th January 2008, aged 109 years. This is Mrs. Spence here. In these photographs, she was born on New Year's Eve 1888. She lived at 64 Beersbridge Road in Belfast. She had 8 children, and until her death, she lived with one of her daughters next door to Spence's Fish and Chip Shop. Here. This was a family business started by Eddie in 1921. So that's the house to the right, just to the right of the bus stop, where a bit of the house where Mrs. Spence lived until her latter years, and then there's the chip shop then to the left, and then to the photograph to the right then, that shows you the old style booths that they have, even to this day, in Spence's and the Beersbridge Road. Also in the corner there have quite a bit of information about George Best. This is Mrs. Spence, as I say, in the later stages of her life, particularly the photograph to the right, and that is, I think, and my mum and dad can correct me, I think it's Bishop Harold Miller when he was visiting Mrs. Spence. So Mrs. Spence was asked in an interview with the Church of Ireland Gazette what she attributed what was the secret of her long life. She replied, hard work and clean living. So that was her. She was a member of Willowfield Parish Church and was regularly visited by the rector at the time, Reverend David McClay, as well as my mum when she worked for the church. So my mum tells a story about after that, during that time, my mum called into the house, and but Mrs. Spence said, don't call on Monday because it's then I do the orders for the potatoes. So she was still, whilst even after she'd reached 100, she was still doing the orders for the shop next door. Say well into her second century. And then, of course, as well, another little story about Mrs. Spence is that my granddad took a notion that he wanted to go down and see Mrs. Spence, who he hadn't seen for a few years. Mrs. Spence hadn't seen my mum as well for a few years, so my mum thought that Mrs. Spence wouldn't remember her name. So my granddad walked in, and Mrs. Spence said to my mum, "Put up a chair, Margaret, for your father there." So of course she remembered exactly who my mum was. But you never forget my mum if you've met her. So that's Mrs. Lillian Spence, a phenomenal lady. Another phenomenal lady, then this is up in Roselawn still. You'll see about the middle there, Helen Lewis, 22nd of June 1916, and then died on New Year's Eve 2009. This is Helen Lewis here. She was born in 1916 into a German-speaking Jewish family in Trotnov in the Kingdom of Bohemia. She survived 2 selections by Dr. Joseph Mengele and was later sent to Stutthof concentration camp in northern Poland. When the war ended, she returned to Prague, where she learned of her husband's death during the forced march, whilst her mother, Elsa Katz, who had been deported in 1942, had died in Sobibor extermination camp. And she's commemorated on this headstone you'll see below Helen as Elsa Katz, mother of Helen, 10th August 1883 to 1942 ? A victim of the Holocaust with no known resting place. So in other words, Helen knew that her mother had died in 1942 and where, but didn't know the exact date. So after then Helen got married for a second time to Harry Lewis in Prague in 1947. The couple moved to Belfast, where Helen began to work as a choreographer, also teaching modern dance. Her book, A Time to Speak, was published in 1982, was translated into several languages, and then adapted for the theatre by the late great Sam Macready. In the 2001 birthday honours, Helen Lewis was awarded an MBE for her services to contemporary dance. So Helen is commemorated here at the Crescent Arts Centre. You'll see the plaque to the left there, 1916 to 2009. Dancer, choreographer, writer, Holocaust survivor, who found peace and, see got my glasses, and a home in Belfast, taught dance here. So it's hard to see, but there's 2 blue plaques in the actual photograph, on the darker photograph, and the plaque to the right then is Margaret Byers. She founded Victoria College, located here from 1874 to 1972. She's buried in the city cemetery. So there's actually two plaques to 2 remarkable women at that Crescent Arts Centre on University Road. The next one's up to Derry again. This is in loving memory. It says in the headstone, loving memory of Innes McCormack, died 21st January 2013. And you can just see kind of Derry's walls there to the left. To the left of that second spire, well, the first spire, I suppose, to the left. This is Innes McCormack here. She was a trade union leader and human rights activist. She's the first female president of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. She represented the Unison Union. She also successfully campaigned for the inclusion of strong equality and human rights provisions in the Good Friday Agreement, and was a signatory to the McBride Principles for Fair Employment. In 2002, she was described as probably the best known and most experienced human rights campaigner in this country. Throughout her career, she crossed sectarian lines and national boundaries to fight for those who have faced, in her words, the humiliation of exclusion, particularly women. McCormack was named by the American publication Newsweek in 2011 as one of the 150 women who shake the world, and her life and work have been portrayed by Meryl Streep, who she's pictured with there in the documentary play Seven. Shortly before her death in Foyle Hospice in 2013, age 69, she was asked when asked why she did the work she did, and she replied that at the heart of everything, I desire to see the glint in a woman's eye who thought she was nobody when she realized she was somebody. That's Ines McCormick. It's a cracking photograph, I think, as well. So then back to Dundonald Cemetery again, and you'll see this is the Bowden grave, and Kathleen Bowden, she's commemorated there in the plaque at the front of the headstone. Died 16th March 2017, aged 103 years, a much loved aunt. And this is who she was the much loved aunt to. This is a man called Clark Groves. Clark Groves is a name well known in East Belfast because he ran a hardware shop at Ballyhackamore for many years. Kathleen was responsible for the care of Clark Groves Jr., and then he put the little plaque up there when Kathleen passed away, aged 103. Kathleen was the daughter of Clark and Mary Groves, in other words, Clark Sr. And her father set her up in business as a hairdresser with premises near Hollywood Arches in Belfast. She ran the business for decades until the building was destroyed in a accidental gas explosion, thankfully with no one inside. She finally retired. She had several very famous clients, including Lady Brookborough, who she became firm friends with. They would go on cinema trips together, and Kathleen was invited over to London to style Lady Brookborough's hair and those of her royal companions for the coronation in 1953. So Kathleen then, this is her 100th birthday, and she died, as it says on the plaque there, on the 16th of March 2017, aged 103, and she was interred about 18 months after her death, after leaving her body to Queen's University for medical research. So that's another centurion. I mean, not centurion. Another lady who surpassed 100, Kathleen Bowden. This lady also lived a long life, and she is Emily DeSano. You can see at the bottom of the headstone there, she died 15th December 2018. And she was in her 160th year. She's also commemorated as part of the Eastside Lives project. And there's the panel and the mural for her. As you can see, it's just inside the grounds of Westbourne Presbyterian Community Church, sometimes known as the Shipyard Church, just opposite Pitt Park there on the bottom of the Newtonards Road. Close up of the mural. And she had, Emily had met Pasquale Desano, who was 25 years her senior, after he had stowed away on a boat from Italy to England. And so they founded the Desano ice cream shop, and had 3 children. After the death of Pasquale, known as Sammy, in 1951, Emily continued to work at the shop not far from the Westbourne Church there. She lived in the house next door to the shop, which is a bookcase on the wall, which can be pulled back to reveal a door. Through the secret passage was the ice cream business. The great-great-grandmother lived in the house until she was 100, and she attributed her long life to salmon and soy sauce, presumably accompanied by lots of sliders and 99s. So that's Emily DeSano. So you noticed that Mrs. Spence, who worked in owned the chip shop, she lived to beyond 100, and Mrs. DeSano, who owned an ice cream shop, she lived to beyond 100 as well. So I think the moral of the story is, if you want to live to a ripe old age in East Belfast, firstly you have to be a woman, and secondly you have to eat lots of ice cream. and fish and chips. So 2 more to go. This is the penultimate grave there. This is at Roselawn Cemetery, and this commemorates Georgina, known as Ina McCune. This is her here. She was born on 10th August 1917. She lived at Park Avenue, and then after she got married, she moved up to Brentwood Park. In 1953, she became the first woman to win the Best All-Rounder Cup. Traveled all over the world with her husband, her beloved bicycle. Ina broke the record for the time it took to cycle from Derry Post Office to Belfast Post Office in 1953. She had 4 hours to do it, and she did it in 3 hours and 46 minutes. And the bicycle used is now in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum. I think that is possibly the bike there in the Transport Museum. So her husband, Billy, who was a joiner, died in 1989, and then Ina was interviewed on her 100th birthday, and she said it's a long time to be alone, but she was grateful for the happy memories she can cherish. That we love children, but we put cycling in front of that, so we never had any children. Ina was also involved in the Ballymacarrt railway disaster in 1945. Obviously surviving, but there was more than 20 lives lost as a result of that. And she said that being involved in the Ballymacarrt railway disaster made her appreciate her life even more. And she credited cycling as a secret to her long life. She died on 28th March 2019, aged 101 and 7 months. The last one then is over to Cornmoney Cemetery, and this is Lyra McKee. So you'll see that on this headstone, she's commemorated as 31st March 1990 to 18th April 2019. Treasured daughter, beloved sister, doting auntie, loving partner, and friend to all. Then you'll see at the base of the grave there, that plaque, there's a little message from her. To the right, you can see the representation of a pen there as well. Sadly, Lyra's mother died less than a year after her daughter. So she's commemorated there as Joan Lowry McKee, born 2nd December 1950, died 10th March 2020. Wonderful mother, devoted granny, and adored great granny. And then there's a little image from her, a little message, sorry, from her about her to the left of the plaque. That's Lyra McKee there. And that's a mural which is down at Kent Street, down the side of the library, Belfast Central Library. And then, so that's the same street then where this mural now has been erected, or painted, sorry. And so that's Lyra McKee, and it says it won't always be like this, it's going to get better. So that's the sunflower bar to the right, just to give you some idea of where that mural is. And interestingly, when they redecorated, well, they repurposed that street there, they replaced all the murals recently as part of the Hit the North. But Lyra McKee's, as far as I know, was the only one that was kept. And you can see then there's a film premiered earlier this year, and it was shown recently as part of the film festival as well, called Lost, Found, Remembered. Good man. So this you'll see then this little the image at the bottom right, then it talks about the film that was premiered in April of this year and was recently repeated as part of the Belfast Film Festival in memory of Lyra. It's called Lost, Found and Remembered. So we'll know the story about Lyra. She was a journalist covering a riot up in Derry, and she was shot dead during the riot. So, and then she was buried in Belfast. Despite being from a Catholic background, she was buried following the funeral service at St Anne's Cathedral. And that was selected because of the number of people that wanted to get into the cathedral to pay their last respects to Lyra. So we're going to finish with 3 quirky headstones. These are extras, and just to end on a bit of a high, hopefully. And this isn't a Donald. This is in loving memory of our great aunt Frances Hannah. And you'll see there, as well as the flags, it says "No Surrender" at the bottom of the plaque. He was died at Stormont Clinic, Somerville Avenue in Belfast, and she aged 89 when she died on the 18th of March 1991. The next one then is the filtered one then is this in Roselawn, and it is Mary Doyle, and she died on 28th September 2006 whilst living at 62 Rushfield Avenue in Belfast, and she was aged 60. But as you'll see at the base of the headstone, again, this is in Roselawn, it says "Forever 39." So Mary would have celebrated at least 20 39th birthdays. And you'll see that her husband is also referred to as the Bard of Balnafi. I think that was a self-appointed title. And the last headstone then, again at Roselawn, it commemorates Hugh Mallinson Duff, who worked for GCHQ and was in the Merchant Navy. But his wife, Isabella Nee Curry, she was born 29th November 1929, died 3rd August 2017. She was a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. And then the final thing on on her headstone says, "This is the quietest she has ever been." So, and then loved by all. So that's a quirky one to finish on. This is my latest book, 20 graves in each of 20 different local cemeteries. It's coming up to Christmas after all. So no pressure, folks. Thanks very much. That's all. Your suffering is now ended.